Hi, cities. How are you doing? Welcome to NIASIM. Hope you are great. Voting Rights Act could be overturned. Now, let me tell us something because there are some certain things that you hear. First of all, you ask yourself, how do people wake up to go this far? I mean, how do they sleep and wake up thinking of all this? That shows you that the people that you thought are with you are actually not with you. But you know from the onset that they have never been with you, that they can wake up any day to do something. And I am going to say this. If they ever overturn this, that shows you the level of this government. It is nothing but dictatorship. I don't want to say Black people or we are doomed or something, but I wanted to know that if this ever comes to pass, it is dictatorship. These people, like I keep saying this, they've been how many years ahead? They were 400 years ahead. Still, they are not comfortable. They are not okay. They want to take the tiniest that you have. They want it away. They don't want it to have anything. They don't want it to have any right. But sincerely speaking, this man was never, ever, he never ever lied about his plans. He was very truthful with it, and they are all coming to pass. Let's get into this video.
Countless Black people were hung in trees, burned, tarred and feathered, shot, imprisoned, exiled for the Voting Rights Act. As soon as you peep their game, they attack. This week, the Supreme Court was back at it, and it looks like we're staring down yet another blow to Black voting power in this country. Imagine that. We are the target. Again. Now, if you know your history, like I know my history, you know that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a major win for the civil rights era. It was meant to protect us from the racist voter suppression tactics that had been the norm for so long. But here's the problem. Over the past decade, this law has been slowly picked apart by the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court has been slowly growing more conservative. And this week, the justices heard a new case that could cut even deeper into our already fragile voting protections. So this all started with the state of Louisiana, which has a Black population of about 30%. After the last census, the state was required to redraw its congressional maps. That's normal. But here's the catch. After a lot of legal back and forth, Louisiana was told it needed to create 2 majority Black districts to fairly represent the state's Black voters. Eventually they did. But then not out of nowhere, a group of so-called non-Black voters jumped in and said, hold up, we've got a problem with that. Mind you, not the Black folks, not the legislature, not the court, but this group didn't like the idea of adding a second Black majority district. So they took it to court, and now it's in front of the Supreme Court, because that's what happens when white folks get upset. What's wild is that we've been here before. Just 2 years ago, this same court, with Chief Justice John Roberts writing the opinion, upheld a very similar provision of the Voting Rights Act in Alabama. They said, yeah, if Black voters are being packed into one district or spread out to dilute their power, that's not okay. That decision gave folks a little bit of hope. But now Roberts is acting like that case doesn't even matter, like it's not exactly the same, like it was a one-off. During arguments, the court's conservative justices made it pretty clear they were leaning towards limiting protections for Black voters. Again, Justice Alito tried to argue that chasing partisan advantage isn't the same as using race. But come on now. In places like Louisiana, race and party are so tightly connected, you can't separate the two. Lawyer Nielsen, president of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, told the court straight up, we're talking about racially polarized voting that is above 84%. Translation, the vast majority of white voters in Louisiana simply don't vote for black candidates, no matter their party. This ain't just political, it's racial. But they don't want to admit that. And then we had Justice Barry Kavanaugh, the grapist, who cast the deciding vote in that Alabama case 2 years ago, come in talking about how race-based remedies like this shouldn't last forever. You're right, Brett. It should last as long as all of y'all are racist. But Nielsen reminded him, Congress didn't put an expiration date on this part of the Voting Rights Act. And more importantly, the 15th Amendment, the one that bans race-based voting discrimination, that's permanent because y'all can't be trusted. Ain't no sunset clause on that, because y'all have always been racist and you will always be racist. Justice Kagan asked the question that's probably on your mind right now. What happens if the court guts this part of the Voting Rights Act? Nelson didn't hesitate. She said it would be catastrophic, because it would. The reason we even have black congressional representation in the Deep South is because of these protections, people. If they get tossed, the map, literally and figuratively, gets a whole lot worse for black folks. We've got to keep organizing, keep voting, keep fighting in the courts and everywhere else. We've got to keep showing up for each other, even when the system tries to shut us down. Keep your people informed and share this video with anyone who needs the information. This isn't just about maps, it's about power. And we know they don't give it to us. We have to take it by any means necessary. But you need to be educated on how the game is played. You need to be disciplined to play the game to win. And you have to have empathy for your brothers and sisters who don't yet know everything they need to know. I love you, black man. I love you, black woman. Knowledge is power. Power to the people.
Say it loud.
The Voting Rights Act of 1965, as in the law that Dr. King lobbied Congress to get passed, Martin Luther King Jr., as in the law that John Lewis and other civil rights protesters were beaten by cops on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, trying to get passed. That law, one of the crown jewels of the civil rights movement and the legislative achievements that it brought forth in this country. That law, a law that was meant to give force to the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which black political activists 100 years earlier fought and lobbied to get passed and ratified. And today the Supreme Court heard an oral argument in a case called Louisiana versus Calais. And I have not listened to the oral argument yet. I'm still catching up on some of the oral arguments from earlier in this sitting. But based on the coverage, it sounds like they're skeptical, and they voted to rehear the case. This is the second year in a row that they're hearing this case. And they explicitly asked the parties to provide briefing on the question of whether or not the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Section 2, as applied in Louisiana, is unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. Racially discriminatory. It is infuriating that these judges, these justices, have the gall to tell the 150 million plus women in this country that they don't want to be tyrannical and rule for some constitutional right to abortion because they don't want to legislate from the bench. They don't want to hand down some ruling that everyone has to follow. Leave it up to the states. Problem solved. Abortion is fixed as an issue. Thank you, Supreme Court. But the Voting Rights Act of 1965, been on the books for over 50 years, an act of Congress. Something, if you took a poll right now, I'm not sure you could find very many Americans who are against voting rights. And if this coverage is right, and they do strike this section of the Voting Rights Act down, then they will be legislating from the bench. They will be ruling by judicial fiat. They will be overriding the will of the people as expressed in our laws in Congress. And these justices have the gall to cloak their constitutional decisions in this rhetoric of history and tradition, and oh, we're going back to the original public meaning. And as Justice Jackson aptly pointed out in an earlier case, her first oral argument ever as a Supreme Court justice, a case called Merrill versus Milligan, the original public meaning, the history and tradition of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution is that they were meant to remediate the original sin of this country. That is, the institutionalized racism that is built into the fabric of our nation's social and political institutions, and make good on the promise of Reconstruction, a promise that is still yet to be delivered. When Dr. King came to the March on Washington, he talked about these amendments to the Constitution, these amendments that these justices, if they vote to strike down the Voting Rights Act, in this case, will be invoking, will be saying these amendments render this federal law unlawful, unconstitutional. He referenced those amendments in his I Have a Dream speech. And the way that he referenced them, he said, go back and read this. It's all right there. They think we're stupid and that we don't interrogate these ideas, but this stuff is clear. It is in black letter terms. It is our history. And Dr. King says in this speech, America made out a check to the descendants of freed enslaved people. And they said, you're going to have voting rights and you're going to be treated equally. That was a check that in 1963, Dr. King said had still yet to be cashed. He said, we come here to cash a check when he led his March on Washington. He gave his life and years of work trying to cash that check. And he made marginal advances, but the check still hasn't been cashed. And now the Supreme Court is what, going to bounce the check? Going to rescind it? Going to say, actually, we don't promise you voting rights anymore? It is absolutely outrageous. As if this court and its legacy weren't already record-breaking in terms of the damage they have done to the political and institutional structure of this country. With their bogus judicial policy making. And, I know it's unpopular, but the court does important work. In a lot of these cases, the 9-0 cases, they're doing important work, and these opinions, they spend time on them, and in many cases, they're well thought out. But some of these opinions, God, it is the few cases, it's this case, it's Dobbs, it's the affirmative action decision, it's the presidential immunity decision. They just make me want to rip my hair out because they are so absurd. And they are such a betrayal of the Constitution, of the court as an institution. And the worst part is, these people believe they are above reproach. When journalists ask them questions, they look down their noses and say, well, you should read the opinions. They want to silence anyone who wants to criticize the court. The Chief Justice in his year-end report last year said, the bar of professional attorneys in America hasn't done enough to stand up for the courts, hasn't done enough to defend our decisions. Maybe if your decisions weren't indefensible, it wouldn't be so hard for professional organizations like the American Bar Association to defend them. And it's a shame. It's a goddamn shame because the Supreme Court of the United States has been a force for justice in the past. There have been glimmers of moments in our history where the Supreme Court of the United States has really stepped up to its role in our system of government. And there are rare moments, too, when the Supreme Court has been the driving force of some of our worst impulses. Dred Scott versus Sanford, Korematsu versus United States. And now, just a new case every year, and sometimes multiple a year from this current Supreme Court that are adding to that list. It is horrible, and it's a shame. It's a shame. It's such a shame. I don't know what else to say. I'm gonna have more to offer on this once I listen to the arguments and of course once an opinion comes down. But it just makes me so angry and sad for this country and for the court.
White people have had a 400 plus year head start. 400 years worth of generational wealth stolen from our ancestors, Native Americans' ancestors, mind you, stolen. They didn't earn it, took it, and have had a 400 plus year head start and generational wealth. And they can't even handle Black people having one full generation of bare minimum voting right access, bare minimum. We ain't even nowhere near the same level what y'all got. We just talking about voting rights. My grandmother is almost 80, and in her lifetime, she has literally gone from Black people hardly having any voting rights, especially Black women, to gaining a semblance of voting rights, to now those voting rights being back on the chopping block in one lifetime span. Grandmother. This is, it is so enraging. It's giving me goosebumps. And white people, I don't want to hear y'all in my comments. I'm so sorry that y'all are experiencing this. This is so unfortunate. I voted for Kamala. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see a speck of salt in my comments. I'll delete it. I don't want to see y'all right now. I don't care about your condolences. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I'm sick of y'all. I'm so... Jesus. 400 year head start, and y'all can't even handle... This is just...
Good morning. I wanted to have a story time with you and talk about the impact of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 being gutted, and its connection to the 15th Amendment, which is a Reconstruction Amendment. So story time. Back in high school, when I would visit my grandpa Jimmy, he would have me recite the preamble to the U.S. Constitution every time I would come to his house. He gave me about a month to memorize it, but after that month was up, I had to recite the preamble to the U.S. Constitution every time I entered his house. So 3 months into this process, I asked him, I said, why do you have me recite the preamble to the U.S. Constitution every time I come to your house? It seems weird. He said when he was younger, before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, if he wanted to vote, he had to recite the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. It was a voter suppression tactic. And he said that if ever conservatives or white supremacists ever get power the way that they did back then, we could see old tactics of voter suppression make a comeback. And that my generation needs to be prepared to understand what the Constitution says about my rights and how important it is to know it backwards and forwards. And to this day, that still sits with me because here we are in 2025 and the Supreme Court is likely going to gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is tied to the 15th Amendment, which is a Reconstruction Amendment. And I said back in the early 2021, 2022, that if they ever came for Reconstruction Amendments, Black people would be in trouble. Granted, it will impact other communities of color, but it's specifically tied to Black people. And here we are, 60 years after the Voting Rights Act went into effect. We're about to watch as our rights get taken away. We're seeing a rise in anti-intellectualism. We know for a fact that many people don't understand the U.S. Constitution. Basically, they don't understand basic civics from high school. to understand the three branches of government. Our country is being ran by people who were born before the Voting Rights Act was effective and want to take us back to a time before it was effective. It's about to get rough, and I hope you are intellectually ready because you'll need it.
White people have had a 400 plus year head start. 400 years worth of generational wealth stolen from our ancestors, Native Americans' ancestors, mind you, stolen. They didn't earn it, took it, and have had a 400 plus year head start and generational wealth. And they can't even handle Black people having one full generation of bare minimum voting right access. Bare minimum. We ain't even nowhere near the same level what y'all got. We just talking about voting rights. My grandmother is almost 80. And in her lifetime, she has literally gone from Black people hardly having any voting rights, especially Black women, to gaining a semblance of voting rights, to now those voting rights being back on the chopping block in one lifetime span. Grandmother. This is, it is so enraging. It's giving me goosebumps. And white people, I don't want to hear y'all in my comments. I'm so sorry that y'all are experiencing this. This is so unfortunate. I voted for Kamala. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see a speck of salt in my comments. I'll delete it. I don't want to see y'all right now. I don't care about your condolences. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I'm sick of y'all. I'm so... Jesus. 400-year head start, and y'all can't even handle... This is just...
So after hearing oral arguments, it looks like the Supreme Court is gearing up to gut the Voting Rights Act because of reverse racism, and we don't need racial protections anymore. And that means that the racist, oftentimes extremely right-wing, usually Southern politicians are going to redistrict their states to all get out to get rid of the Black vote, Black districts, Black anything. And while this is catastrophic for Black voters across the nation, this is catastrophic for every voter across the nation because it sucks the power out of your vote. With this redistricting, it won't matter how you vote. It won't matter how many people vote Democrat or vote blue or whatever. It's not going to matter. And this isn't the first time that we've seen gerrymandering or felt its implications. We tell you guys all the time, yeah, the South tends to vote the way that it does, largely because of the way that it's districted, but it's about to get a lot worse. This is the very thing that Texas Democrats fought against when they refused to attend sessions where the Republicans were trying to redistrict parts of Texas, but we're about to see that on a national scale. And because, quite frankly, I don't think this is going to make people angry enough to incite any type of real action or real pushback, I'm going to tell you guys now, you need to stop saying, oh, but they voted for this, oh, blah, 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 every time there's a natural disaster or some type of unfortunate event or some type of mass casualty, anything in the South. Because we weren't voting for this in the first place, but we certainly won't be voting for it now. And people can't just get up and move. They can't just relocate to other better places. This is just what life is going to look like unless we do something about it. And the odds that we do something about it, based on all the other things we have done little about, not looking great.
Today, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about a case coming out of Louisiana, and the essence of the case is whether or not the Voting Rights Act is reverse racist. Is it racist against non-Black voters? And to that, I can't help but think about the history of these United States, specifically for Black folks, as African people taken from our land, brought across the Atlantic Ocean to become slaves in perpetuity in this nation. We, against our will, helped build and became the backbone of one of the greatest economies on earth. And from the time of emancipation, Black folks have really been seeking one thing, which is the opportunity to have equal protection under the law. We have, through so many struggles, sought to be able to be equal citizens, to have equal access, and in many cases, looking at the outcomes that are happening for Black people through the lens of the circumstances that we have been handed. And the reality is that the history of these United States is filled with policies and programs that were built intentionally to give European peasants, to give folks who are moving out west a leg up, to give them access to opportunity, education, land, etc. And oftentimes, when Black people were looking for, whether it was policies, laws, or programs in our favor, what we were looking for is the opportunity to have the same access as our white counterparts. In about 2/3 of the way through the 20th century, after much struggle, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act gave Black people for the first time the ability to have enshrined in law protections for us. And since then, there has been consistent pushes in academia, in law, in policy, in programs to continue to give Black people the opportunity to have access to get to equal protection under the law. And while this country has always had a white supremacist underbelly, it felt like the words of Dr. King were enacted, that the moral arc of the universe was bending towards justice. And we are now experiencing the backlash from progress. We are experiencing a coordinated effort by white supremacists over the last several decades who saw the progress of Black people as a detriment to the country. And through years of strategic work, have now developed a Supreme Court majority that sees the advancement of Black people as a thing of the past. We're now having to suffer because America is, and clearly always will be, a racist nation.
The descendants of the people that brought their children to lynchings and treated them like block parties want us to think that they don't need any kind of laws put in place in order to keep them from committing acts of violence against Black and brown people. And the descendants of the people that stayed quiet during those lynchings and just completely ignored Black bodies being burned, being mutilated and hung, want us to think that we will be safe without any laws in place. Because since they don't partake in racism and acts of violence against Black people, then it just won't happen. That's not how this shit works. That's never how this shit has worked ever in the history of this country. On almost a daily basis, I get told in my comments that not all white people are evil and not all white people are racist. And that's true. That's very true. But the people saying this kind of shit in my comments are not the white people that are not racist. Not the white people that will turn a blind eye to any kind of racism. You know what I'm saying? And it is very disingenuous, bro, because for the past decade, white folks have been constantly battling with the fact that Obama was president. And the place that we're in stems from that. And also the fact that Reconstruction and the Confederacy never got disciplined the way they needed to. They should have got belt to ass. Burnt crops was never enough. I've said it in a past video, but limbs should have been chopped off. There should have been physical, financial, and social punishment for everybody that was a part of the Confederacy, whether they were a leader, whether they were a general, whether they were a citizen, complicit in it. You know what I'm saying? Like especially with like the citizens, because that's the part that really allowed racism to run rampant in this country, because there should have been extreme social outcasts and extreme financial punishments and penalties put on these people, because that kind of evil should never be accepted. That kind of evil should never be normalized. And that's exactly what's happened over the past few centuries. They just got a pat on the hand and said, don't do that again. But we're not going to stop you from doing it again. And what did happen? It fucking happened again. Now we have laws from the fucking 60s that are going to get ripped away that we knew was going to happen. We were screaming it from the heavens. They're going to take our rights away. And they're going to take your rights away. But you're going to be okay with it because you're racist.
If you're not aware that the Supreme Court is currently hearing arguments that could ultimately lead to the overturning of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, you need to be, and I need you to understand why it should matter to you. Right now, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the case Louisiana versus Calais? Something. I don't know. Essentially, back in 2020, a new district was drawn or created in the state of Louisiana that was effectively a majority minority district, meaning mostly black and non-white residents in that space. And it added some congressional seats for Louisiana, People did not like that, and thus they've sued, and it's gone all the way up the ladder to the Supreme Court, and they sued under the guise of non-African Americans. What the Supreme Court is currently looking at is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 was one of the core permanent, meaning it did not have an expiration date, permanent clauses within the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that basically says that you cannot discriminate on the basis of race when it comes to voting. Again, you need to remember that the Voting Rights Act was lobbied for and put in place because of and to counter the Jim Crow South. Section 2 also has implications on non-English speaking voting citizens. So this goes beyond just, yes, black folks. We're talking about black and brown folks. We're talking about marginalized groups, particularly and largely in the South. Half of the black population in this country resides in the South. This Section 2 applies nationwide across the board, not on a state-to-state basis, which is important to note because for the other vast majority voting rules, voting laws, states have discernment and can make their own decisions based on certain things. So this is, as of right now, the one thing nationally that is telling states you cannot create laws, you cannot create maps. This is about maps. You cannot draw or gerrymander maps to effectively eliminate or dilute the voting power of marginalized groups. If you're unfamiliar with what gerrymandering is, it's exactly what I just said. Gerrymandering is the deliberate redrawing and redistricting of lines and stuff on maps to effectively dilute the voting power, dilute the representation of marginalized groups. Historically, it's been black people. Currently, it's still black people, but it also includes other marginalized groups. The Voting Rights Act is also super integral to folks with disabilities. What they're using to try to claim that we no longer need this section of the Voting Rights Act is simply saying that this country is not in the state that it was in 1965. Racism does not exist to the extent that it did then as it does now. And that is bullshit, and you and I both know it. You and I both know it. We might have come far, but we have not come far enough. And while they may no longer be able to issue poll test or literacy tests and poll taxes, best believe they try every way they can to actively disenfranchise and dilute the voting power of black and brown citizens in this country. What happens if they succeed, and they likely will succeed, in effectively eliminating Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act? Well, you will see a significant decrease in the representation in Congress. Initially, it doesn't and won't stop there. You'll feel the effect locally too, because remember that these maps that they are working so hard to draw impact your local government too. Your school board, your city council, like they impact all of those, your mayor and other governing and elected officials. But immediately you'll see it in Congress. Immediately you'll see the number of black representatives and black Congress people and black senators eliminated, vanished. And for what? To all create silos of power, to create this cipher, if you will. And it's so stupid, but this is how they set the system up. This is what they want to do. This is why we need to effectively end.
This is all I got from this video. You know, the sister that said that these people had 400 years ahead. They had 400 years ahead. Still, they are not okay. They are not comfortable. They do not like the fact that you have rights. So they are also looking for a way to take away the rights that you have. When I tell you, you and I know, I don't have to say it for you to know that these people are straight up fascists. That's why they decided to make anti-fascist, anti-NIFA, anti-fascist policy to silence people, to keep people quiet. The truth is that it gets scarier every day on daily. Like the brother said, these people were the people that took their children to go and watch where my own people are being straight up on the tree. Yeah. Man, really, I don't know how to say this. Every day, Black people wake up, it's a different story, you know? You wake up today, you don't know what it's happened. That is how horrible it is. At least the last one I am going to tell you is that I am sure you remember the young man that was laying on Shane. Last month, we are still fresh, okay, like we're up to 15 or 16 day of October, right? Last month, a young Black man. I think that was where we stopped. Not just only that, there were other people too, but I am sure you still remember him vividly, right? That they ended up telling us that it was one story that played out, that it was a self-inflicted, because the police were looking for a way to cover it up, without knowing that God will send somebody that will bring money for a second autopsy. See, the kind of racism, I don't know how I feel, but you see, racism before this, yeah, that was before at the end of Biden and Harris administration, that I said that the kind of racism I am seeing now, that I don't know what will happen when they leave. That it might be bad. And like, I knew what was going to happen. The administration ended. The new administration started. It became really horrible. And let me tell you something. If they ever try to overturn this, I want you to know that we truly live in dictatorship. Can't trust any of these people, not even for a day, for a minute, for a second. I don't know who allowed this, or who is going to allow this to happen. But no human being deserves this, you know? Ooh. I am so upset that this is happening. But there are some things you do not have power over, and this is also part of it. I don't have power over anything. What I do, maybe someday. But for now, this is very sad. You know, that, the fact that people thought about this, it's crazy. There are some things I sit down, like, aside from me working and also coming to correct this content that I talk about and all that, there are some things that I will never, ever imagine, or I will never, ever, it never comes to my mind, But anybody that wakes up and I don't know, anybody that wakes up with this kind of thoughts in his or her heart must really be very dangerous. The person must be avoided by all costs. It's as simple as that. I don't want to say we are doomed. I don't want to say we are like what is going to happen and all that. But one thing I want some people that voted for this administration to know is that this man repeatedly, he did not lie about his plans before the election, that he will be a dictator one day. And this is it. And he has already said that he is not sure that he is going to make it to heaven. He already knew, because there is nothing much to talk about. He knew that he wasn't going anywhere close. Number one, what they are trying to do, they are terminating the constitution, deport criminals, but they are deporting innocent people, grabbing people that I have never seen where a convicted felon, a convicted one with how many felonies, that is something, is putting up all these shows. America messed up. Bye for now.